Hi there. I looked into this oil price idea a little bit more because I thought, well, okay, maybe I can make a nice story about it, and I did, and it's linked next to this video. I didn't come up with a dollar price for oil. I think that the dollar price for oil is something that is just impossible to determine. The dollar system is a racket, and the racket is especially intended to allow depletion of the oil resources to maximize their use. That's because it makes a lot of people happy to do that, and it satisfies a lot of drives and needs and desires of people. The banking system really exploits that, the competition and the growth myth, but also because it wants to profit itself. If oil, let's say, for instance, if oil was only sold in the currencies of the producers of oil, so in the currency of Iran or Iraq, then of course it would be limited by the amount of money that these countries would print, and that would be limited by their needs, by their actual needs as a country. What do you need for external goods? And they would be trading and bargaining their oil away in return for something they get back. That would limit, of course, the amount of oil they would sell, and would make it highly unpredictable how much oil there was available. So that's a no-no. That has been a no-no from the start. And I guess they succeeded in breaking through that and making an oil dollar, because in the beginning, of course, there was an oil or there was a dollar gold or dollar silver relationship, and that was understandable. But of course, that also had to be abandoned because there is a limited production of gold and silver, so you cannot. That would limit the supply of oil as well. Plus, you had to deliver it and mine it. It's all very intensive. So that's one of the reasons, I think, one of the main reasons you would abandon the gold standard. Now, that abandoning the gold standard and also these new technologies in agriculture really unleashed or opened up the floodgates for massive use and expansive use of fossil fuels, also generating new people, more people, increasing the population, generating more consumption, and all the while satisfying all these people that catch the fees and profit from that. It was a lot of energy, and it made a lot of people happy. And those forces are still in play. The banking system is still playing the role of making sure that the price, remains there where there's massive consumption, and there's also exploration, and there's the story. The problem with that is that it creates a massive danger, and Michael Rupert talks about that, of course, the crisis that you get after peak oil. But it's not really clear how you quantify that and what it really embodies. And so I looked into food production, because that's of course where it strikes the hardest. And I came across a paper that explains that in 2030 there will be just about enough food production for North America. And the rest of the world will have a shortage for about 100 million people won't have food, but in the US it will be just enough, and then you get like 1900 calories per person, which is not very much. With 2.1 billion Americans or something like that. The problem with that paper is that it assumes normal oil availability, and it actually assumes an increased yield. So it assumes the use of these advanced farming technologies like Monsanto systems with the herbicides and the pesticides and the stofficides. Now, that's an interesting benchmark. So 2030 you have barely enough if you use intensive farming. Add to that paper, that article, the publication of the Pentagon that says in 2015 we'll have massive fuels shortages in fossil fuels availability. So it will drop off much earlier. You know immediately that the 2030 scenario won't work. There won't be the intensive farming because there won't be the fuel. You know that in 2015 the problems will start. And what will the real problem be then? Well, I looked into sustainable agriculture, ecological farming, intensive farming, and something that is called permaculture. And the funny thing is, an important thing to notice, is that the productivity of sustainable farming is equal to to that of intensive farming. It is slightly less, but of course you can bring more land into culture, because with the increased productivity of agriculture, the land that was actually farmed has been reduced. So you have to have about 5% more land in use, and then you have exactly enough, as I say, amount of fuel or amount of food available for people as you have now. But there's a gap, there's a moat, there's a period, or there's a ravine between intensive farming and the sustainable farming, and that ravine, that abyss, is it really what it is formed by the fact that the intensive farming kills the earth. The earth is not fertile. Nothing grows. It's poisonous. And it needs to rain on it for a couple of years, and it needs to grow. It have all kinds of plants on it that have nothing to do with something that you can eat, until it develops into living earth again. Living earth is different than the dead clay that's plowed over in these intensive farms. It's a web of fungi and worms and roots and stuff like that, and it can be very, very productive. But after the collapse of intensive agriculture because of the sudden fossil fuel crisis, it won't be productive. That land won't be productive. So you got the combination of the intensive farms not being able to produce any food because they simply cannot be run. The earth of those farms not be able to sustain any life because they have been killed, and the rest of the arable land not being prepared to be producing anything, so also not being productive. And you're on an island, you're on a continent. You won't be able to fly in food, because how are you going to pay for the fuel? How are you going to pay for the food? You don't produce anything because you don't have fuel. See, it's a massive calamity, and the real, let's say, the real materialization of it is this dead earth syndrome, or this dead earth period, this gap. And you could quantify it by of course you have to know a lot more about how oil availability affects agriculture and how quick oil can become unavailable, because of course you have reserves. You can ration them, and you can of course be very specific about your allocation of fuels, and then it might not be a problem. But the irony is, of course, that as long as you keep intensive farming with the fuels, you won't be able to switch to sustainable farming in time to survive, if you have to live only from that land. So you can basically make a formula that says that that is a function of land that can be farmed intensively, land that can be adopted to non-intensive farming and sustainable farming, and the productivity of the land and the productivity of the intensive farmed land. And you can plot out the food availability right after, let's say, peak oil effects become serious. And I think it can be quite a dip. And because you're on an island, because of course you're on a continent, but you cannot ship in food from abroad. Also because those countries abroad have exactly the same problem. Everybody's going to go, oh shit, what now? That will mean that people will die and starve. And I would say you can exactly calculate exactly how many there will die. You can have a number of scenarios, because once fuel becomes unavailable, it becomes unavailable. I don't really believe in gradually rising prices but still available and stuff like that. That's not how. I don't think that's how things work. You see, just like farms that are now disappearing because it becomes too expensive they gradually disappear. They just go out like different candles, let's say. We say in Holland, gaat uit als een nachtkaars. Like a candle you left on burning, and in the end it dies out. Unnoticeable, gradual, and suddenly there won't be any, suddenly you will have this calamity. I'm interested in anybody that knows about a real analysis of that calamity and how, what different scenarios there are. And I'm not even talking about climate change now. This has nothing to do with climate change. This simply has to do with the banking system maximizing the speed of depletion of our oil resources. I hope you find this interesting, and thanks for listening.